tú con la entrada. ¿Sabes? No, asegúrate que no está Twitter, entra en the hole. Pero los jalos se está apretando. There you go. Okay. ¿Quieres que jale más? All right.
Hey Tom, how you doing? This is Tom.
Hello.
Good to see you. How are you?
Great. Had a very good. They're doing some good stuff. Interesting things like looking at the toxicity and waste of hookah and shisha from the water pipes and the remnants of the stuff that's in there, which most people just dump down the drains apparently against, hazardous waste recommendations.
Right. And what are the do you know the toxicological impacts of that?
No, I mean that's just now being addressed, but the fact that they've got 3 papers that they're going to be publishing soon about what's in the hookah wastewater, and there's been one study done actually by a SDSU researcher. Waste products, and it's mostly just dumping it down the drain. And the fact is that this is full of junk, it's full of chemicals that you would expect. Everything, nicotine being the most toxic probably, and lots of other stuff, metals too, they've been finding. And, the regulations on that haven't been applied. I mean, if this stuff is, as EPA has ascertained, toxic hazardous waste product, then hookah bars need to have a management plan for that. They have to be
absolutely
generators,
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so I learned a lot, but they were very receptive to what I had to say, and I'm going to be doing a fair amount of that same stuff here today.
Oh, that's great. Do you have a lot of animations in your presentation?
Not a lot, no.
Okay, just because I'm
arrows coming in, that's about it.
I'm showing it in Google Slides. Is that going to be okay?
Well, if you share the screen, so I flip my own, right, rather than you doing it.
Yeah, it'd be great if you were able to present yourself.
Yeah, that's
PowerPoint.
You just have to allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, I can do that.
When everybody's ready, I'm ready.
Okay. I am just making you co-host for this meeting, Tom.
Okay.
So you'll be able to, but you have to exercise that responsibility with great care.
I take it very seriously.
Yes. Hey, Shelley, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Shelley.
Looks like people are trickling in here.
Looks like we got a crew.
Hello.
Hey, Win.
Hey.
Hi, Win.
How you doing, Shelly?
Good. How are you?
Living the dream. I'm eating rice and cheese today.
Ooh. Starving student.
I thought that was a treat to myself.
At least it isn't ramen.
Yeah, I ran out of that.
Uh-oh.
Had to change it up.
Is Iowa State your alma mater?
It is, yeah.
Uh-oh.
I went there for undergrad. You know somebody from Iowa State, or did you go there?
No, I just have relatives in Iowa.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was definitely a good place to focus on my Schoolwork, nothing else to do there. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. We have a few people here, not as many as we normally would, but some will presumably be joining soon. Wynn, I don't know if you want to kick us off with our check-in and introduction.
That sounds great. I'm trying to share my screen real quick. Let me see. Okay, cool. All right, so for the agenda today, we'll have a check-in with everybody, and then we'll have a presentation from Dr. Novotny, and we'll follow that up with discussion. For the check-in, introduce yourselves. Feel free to voice your pronouns or anything else that you'd like to share with us. And then also, if you have any updates about the trash world or any agenda additions that you'd like to add. So I can start, and then I'll just call on the next person to go. So I'm Wynn. I'm a co-lead with Tony Hale of this group, and I have two trashy updates actually. The first one is that I just realized we missed our birthday. We turned 1 year old like last month. We should have celebrated, so I apologize. But really exciting. It's been great to be with everybody for a whole year already, and I'm really looking forward to all the opportunities that we have yet to come.
It's great that we can talk even before turning 1.
Yep. And also, if anybody's interested in doing some database management with me, I've been working on creating a open science framework page where I'm going to be hosting like 50 different trash related data sets. And it's a pretty big lift to get all that metadata put onto there. But if anybody's interested in co-authoring that database, or you're interested in sharing some data, it's going to be totally open source and have some good resources for people. So you can reach out to me. And I'll pass the mic to Shelly.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Shelly. I work for San Francisco Estuary Institute, as well as co-chair the Trash Monitoring Work Group. And I'm trying to think of, actually the big news is we're having a Trash Monitoring Work Group meeting on November 12th. So mark your calendars from 9 to 12. We've got some guest speakers. We've got Ezra Miller from SFEI. She's going to talk, or the proper term, Tony Z.
Yes.
He's going to talk about diversity and inclusion and those kinds of things. And we've also got a speaker from the state of Maryland who's going to talk about some of the work they've been doing with trash on one of their river watersheds there. So there's going to be updates from each one of the subcommittees. So I'm looking forward to it. How about Gary?
Hey guys, Gary Conley with Second Nature. We build tools to help cities quantify where their trash problems are, if they're making progress towards reducing their trash inputs to stormwater. I don't think I have any updates, but it's great to hear, Wynn, that you're putting that database together. We'll definitely have some data to ultimately contribute to it. Right now, we're doing experiments to try to evaluate the efficacy of image-based trash identification. And so we have a data set now that we're building that for each observation, you have like an OVTA observation, on-land visual trash assessment, that lots of cities are doing to meet their regulatory requirements, measured trash volumes, wherein you go and you actually pick up all the trash on that section that you evaluated, and then the score that comes out from the machine learning algorithm for the images that were captured on that section. So I'm not exactly sure how that will fit into what you're creating, Wynn, but if we can figure out a way to make it work, we will have a contribution after some time.
Awesome. Yeah, the database that I'm creating it's totally not structured, so it can take really any sort of data you want to put into it, and then it can create metadata for that file type.
Great. How about Jarma?
Hello, this is Jarma Bennett from the Office of Information Management and Analysis at the State Water Board. I don't really have any trashy updates, but I'm happy that we are now over 1. And I'll pass it on to Aaron.
Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Heyman. I'm not sure why my video is not working, but oh well. I work for the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy as part of their Prop 1 team and also managing the trash cleanups and citizen science projects we are launching. And I'm the co-chair of the Citizen Science Subcommittee for the Trash Monitoring Work Group. No real updates other than all of our cleanup events are still sort of on hold until we can figure out ways of safely bringing people together in groups. So basically for the foreseeable future. But hopefully by March or April, we'll have this figured out. Let's see, I will pass it on to Margaret.
Hello, I'm Margaret McCauley with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency up in Seattle, and I'm just trying to keep up with California, where there's always lots of interesting things happening. The only sort of trash news I have is there seems to be some sort of international marine debris trash problem between Russia and the U.S. on the Aleutian Islands, Bering Strait, and I don't know any more than that, but it has already involved the embassy. So I'm curious to learn more about whatever's going on up there. So.
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Tony Hale, he, him, Program Director for Environmental Informatics at the San Francisco Estuary Institute and co-lead of this subcommittee. Quick updates. We will be leading a training in November 20th, for a method focused on tobacco product waste monitoring. So Shelley will be in Southern California out in the field doing virtual training, and we'll be up here in the Bay Area as well, and we'll be training a number of trash monitoring practitioners in identifying tobacco product waste in the ambient environment. So that's exciting. And then we're also coming up on the time when we're wrapping up the playbook, the trash monitoring playbook, which will feature a number of different trash monitoring methods and matching them to the families of management questions. So that's what I have for the trashy update. I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to Walter. Are you there, Walter?
I sure am. Hey everyone, Walter Yu, Caltrans, data governance program manager. So work with our chief data officer on all things data governance. So obviously we've been keeping very busy. My trashy update is we actually presented at the CASPA conference this year. So we, along with others, we served on technical panel to present our projects, respective projects using AI to reduce trash loading. So let me share the link in the chat. So included with that was our own Gary Connolly here on the call, and Chris Summers and others. Let me find the chat. And then so that's the presentation. And the next steps are that we're going to continue developing our portion, which is using image recognition technology to analyze, identify trash within our visual assessment photos, i.e. OVTAs, and then classify them using a score. So it's an ensemble of 2 models put into 1. So we will continue developing that and hopefully be able to present at some point to the water boards in the near future. So I will hand it over to, I'm going to look down Thomas. I don't know if he's went. I think he's the speaker. Thomas, can you hear us? You might be on mute.
Are you referring to me by any chance?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was waiting to be introduced to give the talk. I can.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the ground rules are, but you're just
Okay.
alphabetically there. So anyway.
Well, I'll give you a little update though. I gave a talk this morning to the FDA about tobacco waste, and one interesting thing for us is that they are required to do environmental impact assessments of new tobacco products, and they have now been deluged with new tobacco product applications for approval. In September was the deadline for all of these to come in, and so they're getting thousands and thousands of these new products, and all of them do require an environmental impact assessment. And so far, what these companies report is like, oh, we don't expect anything, and then so FDA has to respond to that and figure out what, if anything, that they can find in terms of potential impact assessment. So anyway, it's just interesting to follow the tobacco industry on this as well.
I think we haven't heard yet from Jennifer.
Jennifer and Jana. So we'll go with Jennifer.
I'm happy to give an update. I'm Jennifer. I'm the plastic pollution coordinator with the Surfrider Foundation. As far as trashy updates, I forget, somebody mentioned that their kind of cleanup events were on hold, and we have actually been promoting solo beach cleanup. So we've kind of readjusted some of our protocols and our database and everything to get individuals out. It was pretty slow there at first, but we did a big push for International Coastal Cleanup Month last month, and we got quite a bit of data. So that was pretty exciting to see an increase of people still wanting to get involved despite, kind of everything that's going on. So yeah, that's our trashy update.
Hi, everyone. This is Jana Tang. I think it's my turn now. But I'm with Michael Baker International, and we help a lot of agencies and municipalities comply with the trash provisions across the state. But I don't have any specific trashy updates for everyone, but looking forward to the presentation today.
Did we miss Casey also? I think we might have.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think we
Casey.
did.
Casey, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'll give a quick update. I'm Casey Cruikshank. I am the Coastal Programs Coordinator at the North Coast Environmental Center in Humboldt County. We also had a successful coastal cleanup month with individuals participating in their neighborhoods and on the beaches. And we were able to collect quite a bit of data as well. So that was exciting. And that's all I have for a trashy update. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for sharing. I don't have my video on because I have food in my mouth. You might be able to hear it. But next, I think, when did we want to, I guess, ask if anyone wants to add anything to the agenda first before we kick it off with Dr. Novotny.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any items to add to the agenda? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and proceed with our esteemed guest, Dr. Tom Novotny. One reason why we wanted to hear from Dr. Novotny, aside from him being a very magnetic speaker and in our world when it comes to looking at waste, particularly tobacco waste, is that we thought it would actually be extremely topical and salient to some prior conversations that we were having, where when in the context of data interpretation, we realized that one blind spot that we often carry as physical scientists or program people is with an awareness to socioeconomics, the kind of confluence of trash and economic activity, taking into account some of the kind of social dynamics that influence how we can understand these data that have a geophysical reality, of course, but also have a socioeconomic intersection there as well. And so that got us thinking about who we might wish to get us thinking along the new lines when it comes to these types of activities. And Shelley and I had an awareness of Dr. Novotny from our common interest in tobacco waste, and found his insights to be particularly deep and helpful in advancing everyone's understanding of the things like the impact of tobacco waste on certain economic economic activity. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Novotny to present to us on his topic on tobacco waste. So, so Tom, would you like to present your screen?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll be showing a bunch of slides. I may have to skip through a bunch of them just because there's too many for the time that we have. But I do want to emphasize, you know, what we're going to talk about in terms of the economics of this, which we don't really know yet a lot about this. There's been a few studies that I'll point out, but I think the important thing is to realize that there is a sort of a systematic way of approaching this that we're going to be taking on shortly with a new award from the California Department of Public Health Tobacco Control Program. So this is a good time to think through this, and at some point I know we're going to be asking for inputs, especially from this group with you know, potentially interaction with some of the databases that you mentioned. So I'm going to talk about some introductions and definition here to this issue. Just very briefly on the toxicity of tobacco product waste, and then review the economic studies to date. Make sure that we all realize what the tobacco industry is doing on this, just to keep reminding ourselves about their interference and the importance of keeping them at bay as not as stakeholders, because they aren't stakeholders. They're a regulatable industry and are really sort of the culprits when it comes to tobacco product waste without actually having any responsibility for the economics as well as the cleanup and other kind of concerns as trash. So I'll tell you a little bit about our economic project, and then just mention some of the research gaps that we're going to hopefully get to. So we know tobacco is still a big deal. You know, even though California is doing much better than most places, we're down to 10.1% or 10.1% of adults who are smokers, which is, you know, still 3 million people smoking and dumping their butts. And there's something short of 1 billion cigarettes consumed here in California every year. I figured it was about 656 million, but that's still a lot of waste, especially when you realize that much of this ends up tossed into the environment. But that's not to say that even the stuff that's not tossed into the environment doesn't have implications for trash, and especially, you know, even in landfills and the leachates that come out of them. So we're pretty, you know, still concerned about it, even though we've made a lot of great progress here in California. Still, there's a lot of deaths due to the tobacco-related illnesses, 35,000 here per year in California, which we consider preventable. That is, everybody's got to die, but these are premature deaths that people don't need to suffer early in life, and that there are healthcare costs. And this is where, you know, my sort of interests, especially in the cost for the environment, are based in the fact that we did a lot of research on healthcare costs, and I'll mention this later, that did a lot of good. It provoked, you know, responsibilities, and also funded a lot of public health programs as a result of the recovery that occurred from the lawsuits related to healthcare costs. There's something else now that's going on called the tobacco endgame. Given the fact that we are down to 10%, what is it going to take to get to zero? And to really push the envelope on this. And so it calls for new politically risky approaches, and, you know, to changing the whole sort of structural and social dynamics. And, you know, that all, you know, economic arguments make a big difference here. What we're going to be talking about is all tobacco products now too, not just cigarettes, although, you know, the most of the information that we know about or have on the evidence is related to cigarette butts, but there's an awful lot of other stuff now. Hookah, ends, cigars, smokeless tobacco pouches, all sorts of other devices that result from smoking. And as we know, pretty much, and I was interested to hear what the cleanup data are, whether or not cigarettes are still the #1 item by count picked up on beach cleanups every year. This is a 30-year summary that was published several years ago that said, basically there's about 1/3 of all the items picked up on beaches are cigarette filters, which is a non-biodegradable plastic device attached to almost all cigarettes in this country. And this year, I understand the Ocean Conservancy's report showed that it was actually food wrappers that was number one nationally, nationally. And I can't help but think that that has to do with COVID and the fact that people are getting a lot more takeout items from restaurants, et cetera, than in the past. So it's probably going to change back and forth again in the future. But nevertheless, this is still a lot of butt waste. As I mentioned, almost 100% of the cigarettes are filtered with the cellulose acetate plant-based plastic filter. 20 cigarettes weigh 3.4 grams. That's a pack of cigarettes. And the estimated waste from this, by weight is 36.8 million kilograms for the US, and here in California it's much lower, of course, 111,300 kilograms. And this doesn't include any of the other stuff besides the filters. So packages, et cetera, is all waste and trash as well. Now, the evidence on this stuff, beyond just the physical waste component, is a couple of areas of concern. One are the toxic chemical leachates that we're learning more and more about all the time. I see a lot of the articles that are being submitted for publication because they send them to me to review. So I get a chance to see what's happening around the world, actually. And then there's the non-biodegradable plastic trash issue, which is, more of the physical element of trash that I think most of us are concerned with. There's a lot of lab studies on the toxicity. I'll mention a few of those. The environmental sampling of soils and water is occurring, and some studies on the sort of physical distribution of cigarette butts across environments, urban and otherwise. And then there are some studies about how butts degrade in the environment, either naturally or in the lab. Human impacts from various exposures, including accidental or on-purpose consumption, believe it or not, and economic impacts, which we'll talk about, and the economic costs of butt waste mitigation. So we'll delve into all of these things, and I mentioned the FDA piece already. So just a sort of brief run of a few studies about ecotoxicological assessments. And these vary from single cell organisms like gram-negative bacteria to EPA aquatic invertebrate toxicity tests, that is standardized tests that show that water fleas are harmed by tobacco product leachates. It's basically like the tea bag that the cigarette butt becomes after sitting in water. And this is the bottom part of the food chain, which one starts to think about whether or not there might be some bioaccumulation as a result of that being part of the food chain. We've shown that in some of the previous studies that there's metals in a lot of the tobacco product waste that leach out from the butts, heavy metals, toxic metals, and whether these reach kind of toxicity levels, we don't know yet. But what we have found now, and I mentioned this earlier, is that there is actually bioaccumulation and bioapplication in several different organisms, invertebrates, as well as trout and marine mussels, which are sort of really selective in terms of their filtering out stuff, incorporating it into their metabolism, which means that it might get into the food chain. I'll just mention one study that has taken a fair amount of gained a fair amount of attention. That's the study that we did almost 10 years ago now, using an EPA protocol for acute marine toxicity, and using both freshwater and saltwater fish, small minnows, top smelt and minnow. And what we did was we looked at smoked cigarette filters with, and these are machine smoked cigarettes, not the ones that you just scrounge up off the environment. But we wanted to make sure that they were fresh, and not having been leached already and stepped on and whatever. So these are machine smoked cigarettes that had remnant tobacco, and then some that had no remnant tobacco, but that the filter was smoked, and then another section that had unsmoked cigarette filters. So we get sort of a dose response as to the exposure and whether or not these are toxic to the animals. And so what we found was that one cigarette butt leached in a liter of water for 96 hours, which is the standard EPA test, indicates that it is that the lethal dose 50 is one cigarette butt in a liter of water. That's qualifications for this to be hazardous waste in the aquatic environment. So there are other studies that would determine whether or not there's hazardous waste otherwise, but this is enough to say, you know, that the aquatic environment could be contaminated by cigarette butts, especially since there's so many of them for so many years. There was less toxicity. Smoked filter, it was 4 butts per liter, and for the unsmoked filter, it was like 8 butts per liter. So it took more kind of exposure to have the same kind of effect. But nevertheless, this qualifies the cigarette butt leachates as hazardous aquatic waste. There have been field studies looking at things such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, carcinogens that are found in urban environments, riverbanks, roadsides where cigarette butts have been dumped, and in different countries. There are elution studies where cigarette butts on a sort of an urban environment have been looked at, studied to see what kind of elution of the nicotine is found, and it was found that one cigarette might contaminate 1,000 liters of water, greater than what is considered no effects on human, or rather animal life, rather. And then there have been nicotine products detected in river samples downstream from wastewater treatment plants. In other words, the wastewater treatment plants don't necessarily get rid of the nicotine. It takes a more specialized sort of approach. And also when you think about the nicotine, it's a pesticide. And so some of the bacteria or other kinds of creatures that are used in wastewater treatment may be affected by the nicotine as well. Right now, I'm involved with another group at UC Santa Barbara to assess the impacts of cigarette butt waste as well as marijuana, whether it's growing or, you know, I don't know how many people dump their doobies, but mostly I think it's the growing impacts on natural environments. That is, these reserves that are administered by the UC. And so they're looking at 3 reserves right now, one of which is approximate to a urban environment and the other is more rural, sampling. And they've been able to find lots and lots of tobacco products in these environments already, just from, you know, visual inspections, but now they're going to be looking at soil and water analyses by sampling the sediments as well as the water and the soils that might be contaminated. So this is going to be one of the first efforts to look in these sort of natural, not urban environments for the potential exposure that cigarette butt waste might have. I just mentioned briefly that we've surveyed poison centers. Kids and dogs and other animals are indiscriminate eaters sometimes, and we found lots of reports of kids having consumed either cigarette butts out of ashtrays, believe it or not, you know, they mimic adult behavior and stick stuff in their mouths, or just eating cigarettes for whatever reason. But also, given the new products that are flavored, that is the e-cigarette products especially, there have been numerous, thousands of reports of poisonings due to kids consuming flavored tobacco products, thinking that they're candy or another kind of, you know, attractive issues. Veterinary reports, there's a couple of veterinary poison centers, and they're pretty rare reports, but dogs do this. In the natural environment, there may be effects on creatures such as estrogenicity, tumorigenicity, and teratogenesis from these chemicals. The chemicals we know cause this. Cigarettes have 7,000 chemicals in them, and 250 of those are toxic. There may be this bioaccumulation, as I mentioned. One of our scientists, Dr. Una Ho, who's been doing some work on the non-targeted analysis of chemicals, has found that nicotine can actually transform into carcinogenic compounds when it's been aged in the natural environment. So that's another issue. I mean, we know that there are carcinogens that get into our water systems, food supplies from pesticides and other kinds of contaminants. It stands to reason that they may also come from significant deposition of tobacco products in the environment. This is actually a real picture from what is this, a black skimmer feeding a cigarette butt to its chick. And this actually was photographed in the natural environment, not faked like there are many pictures of animals full of cigarette butts that are kind of a fake setup, but this was real. So it happens, and we know that microplastics, when things break down, and these are plastics, may be found in marine specimens as well, all over the world. And you know, the ocean is full of microplastics as a result of not just cigarette butts, of course, but all of the other plastics that are out there. But what we can see is that there's a pathway to human health risk for these chemicals that, you know, maybe the volatiles that I mentioned, the PAHs, but also the compounds that dissolve in water and might get in through aquatic events into either food or into just direct exposure, or maybe water in our water that's not filtered out of our water treatment, and, you know, or direct exposure to people playing in the environments where they exist. So it's conceivable. So this provokes our thoughts about things like the precautionary principle. You don't need to show that there are human health effects if there's a potential for them, or the evidence that these chemicals and the objects that produce them are harmful. So precautionary principle might be brought into play here. So on the economic side, I mentioned to you that this, you know, my interest in this dates back to an MMW article I wrote back in 1994, where we had a data set that allowed us to really narrow down what the costs of smoking were for a hospital and physicians and pharmaceuticals and nursing home, and, you know, all of the cost centers. And we were able to do this and separate it out as to what the states actually paid out of their Medicaid and other kinds of state-funded medical care programs. This then served as the basis for the multi-state agreement, which was a lawsuit brought against the tobacco industries by the state's attorneys general that recovered $287 billion in medical care costs, which was small compared to what would have happened had they gone to court and settled it in court. It was actually settled by the Congress. At any rate, you know, once this got published, the next day, I was called up by this lawyer who was, Dickie Scruggs was his name, from Pascagoula, Mississippi, and had a lot to say about, you know, the use of these data for lawsuits. And he and his other colleagues from around the country were appointed as deputy attorneys generals by the states and brought the lawsuit. So this kind of data makes for interesting effects. We published a whole journal supplement on tobacco product waste back in 2011, which included a piece on tobacco product litter in San Francisco. And maybe many of you have heard about this. John Schneider was a former economist at UC Berkeley who did this. At any rate, what he did was he assessed what the cost of cleanup were, the basic direct costs of mitigation for butt waste, and found that, you know, by looking at how much tobacco was sold and how many people were smokers and how many people were tourists, and, you know, the kinds of variables that economists are so good at being able to build into a model, found that it was about 22 cents per pack of cleanup costs, basically, to address the tobacco product waste in this city. So what the city did was added a litter fee onto the pack of cigarettes, passed it through the city council. Mayor Gavin Newsom signed it, and then they got sued by the tobacco industry and their surrogates, and then the tobacco industry put a citizen initiative on the ballot that said you can't add fees onto anything unless you have 2/3 vote of the public. So anyway, it stuck because they managed to resist all of that stuff. And in fact, a couple of years ago, they were able to actually increase it, I think, to 67 or 70 cents a pack, which has a tobacco control impact right away because it raises the price of the product. And otherwise, it also funds educational enforcement and, you know, management for a tobacco waste prevention program in the city. So, and so far, this is the only place that that's happened, which I don't understand. Anyway, John recently then published another paper. We did this just here last June, which kind of translates some of that city-based analysis into 30 of the largest cities in the country. And it was, again, to assess these negative economic externalities caused by cigarette smoking. And the, you know, population and the smoking prevalence weights and several other parameters were used to come up with this model. And for 30 cities, he found that the costs ranged from $4.7 to $90 million per year. Now, that's just 30 cities. That's not the whole country. That's not several states. It's, you know, all of that adding up to about $264.5 million a year for cigarette butt waste mitigation. And there are other kinds of costs in this, just to give you a sense that, and this is what we're trying to sort of start to build into this model development for the economic cost study that the state has funded. And that is these marginal costs of cleanup and disposal that we can estimate from total litter costs and cigarette data in jurisdictions. We also might want to include wildfires, because this is a costly element here in California, but also domestic fires, which are often caused by cigarettes. And then the indirect costs, which is a little bit harder to understand, especially when you talk about ecological services, but I think you all probably understand that. I mean, it's like water purification and, degradation of the environment that is more sort of indirect. Quality of life issues, human health effects, maybe, if we're going to trace these back. But there are other indirect effects that we think can be monetized in this concept and have been done so in for other pollutants. So the abatement costs are pretty clear. It's mechanical and manual abatement from stormwater too, and sewer treatment systems, which obviously is a very significant concern for this group. And then there are the costs associated with harm to the ecosystems and harm to industries dependent on clean and healthy ecosystems, and the costs with the direct harm to human health, if there are any. And if kids are eating cigarette butts, there are some, yes. Now, just to kind of make sure that we don't lose track of the fact that the tobacco industry is very sensitive to this. They do all sorts of corporate social responsibility efforts to keep themselves green and clean, and are insidious about it. And they fund environmental groups, including some of the big ones, including the Ocean Conservancy, which runs the butt cleanup the coastal cleanup. Now, I mean, that sounds like good citizenship, but what happens is that these groups are less likely to be taking on any other more direct upstream preventive approaches to cigarette butt waste, but rather happy to just do the work of the tobacco industry, cleaning up their messes. And there's an opportunity cost that's lost here. All that volunteer time, all of those efforts, all of that goodwill, you could monetize that as well and say, okay, well, this is what the tobacco industry should be responsible for. So Philip Morris, just this last summer here again, launched its new World is Not an Ashtray initiative. So what they're trying to do here is, well, first of all, they do report that adult smokers report that they throw butts on the ground just because they think it's normal. I mean, this is a big normal, and that's got to be an underestimate. You and I know all that. Most of them, though, didn't know that cigarette filters are made out of plastic. They think they're cotton or biodegradable. So that's one reason why they continue to toss them down on the ground. They don't have that information. They're working with some high-tech people. And, I think you've talked a little bit about working with literati. Once they become, stakeholders with the tobacco industry, you're not going to be able to deal with the issues in a much more substantive way than just picking up butts. And that's not enough. What the industry is really trying to do is just increase the scale of participation in butt cleanups, to nudge smokers to use disposal issues and governments to provide these things. I mean, it's their responsibility, and these are downstream approaches that really don't make a bit of difference. And, the industry can show that with its own data. Here's their report on their anti-littering metrics. And what you can see here is that for a year, they picked up almost 1 million butts, but you know what? There's 4.5 trillion that are dumped, and this isn't going to do a darn bit of good, as either at the state level or the global level. So, if you want to increase butt pickup, that's fine. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything, but it doesn't solve the problem. It basically diverts attention from the source reduction, which is the really important issue. So what we're going to do with the project with the Center for Tobacco Control, first of all, I've recruited several environmental economists, a couple of really distinguished ones that were on President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, and a couple of statisticians. We've got a 3-year contract with the department to do this study, to really do a good job on it. We're going to recruit a diverse advisory committee. I've asked Tony to be on that. We're going to synthesize economic models for 3 already known sort of pollutant economic studies. We're going to see what it was that people were able to do with other kinds of non-point source pollution. We're going to develop a list of the environmental cost centers, like cleanup costs, eco-services, loss of ecological services, you know, the places where there would be a monetization of the externalities that we can figure out. And then we're going to develop a model to do this at a local level, to develop a total direct and indirect cost for communities and cities. Because I think that's where the action is, maybe the state, but also, you know, cities and counties are responsible for generating their 5mm waste, you know, for the storm drains, and also just for the maintenance of the health of their environments and communities. So we'll apply this model in 3 cities, at least probably 2 of them will be coastal and 1 of them will be inland. And we'll assist the CTCP with training and communication strategy and updated tobacco product waste toolkit afterwards. So some of these considerations, we're going to look at water pollution, polluted soil, non-biodegradable plastic accumulation, marine ecosystem values. You can understand, you know, all the stuff that we're going to have to deal with, and that's why it's going to take a few years, I think. And then the ecosystem services, and here's a list of those. This was a new term for me. I'm just a family doctor from Guerneville, so this was all new sort of environmental science to me. But you know, we've got people that know how to understand this to work on this with us on our advisory committee, especially from UC Santa Barbara. Well, anyway, options to mitigate, and I don't know how much time I've got, but I'll try to really do a quickie here. You know, there's raising awareness, that's a really important one. And here I just want to show this picture, and I think you've seen this already. These are jewel pods picked up from schoolyards around the Bay Area. And the green ones are menthol. You know, these are the flavored ones. You can tell what kids are really up for. The yellow ones are mango. And, you know, anyway, this is a source of waste that now has become much more prominent, meaning, you know, we can identify the fact that this stuff is toxic hazardous waste. You know, I'll skip over this. This was a fellow I ran into in London who was very interested in the fact that cigarette butts are plastic. He hadn't heard that, although he's a Mr. Anti-Plastic demonstrator. And that the folks against vaping, parents against vaping, have realized that the vapes are trash. The Surfrider has recognized the value of considering trash as a plastic waste product as well. You know, we've tried to deal with these things with outdoor smoking bans, and, you know, lots of cities have prohibited smoking on the beaches. The state has finally done so a year ago. And yeah, that helps, but, you know, the evaluations of these things shows that they really aren't enforced very well, which, you know, police have other things to do. And so this is not an answer, it's sort of downstream. National Geographic has featured cigarette butts as toxic plastic pollution last year in a video that, if you have a chance to look at that, it's really interesting. But what we're trying to do is think about extended producer responsibility. And this is where internalizing the costs of products into the price of cigarettes would change the sort of ownership of the waste product, because it's EPR extends from the manufacturing down to the deposition of consumer products, and putting the price back onto those all along the way, whether it's at the distribution level or the collection level, it shifts the burden away from government and taxpayers to the producer. And that's sort of the main point of this, this note. Product stewardship is another component of this, and I think probably all of you realize what this means, but it's the process of minimizing the impacts of the product all along the life cycle. Producers have the greatest responsibility, but there's other are also involved in this, and we have examples of it. You know, the plastics initiatives, but also paint care, mattresses. You know, lots of other lots of other trash that is somehow managed as extended producer responsibility. I just want to really emphasize the electronic cigarette waste issue, because these are single-use. Many of them they contain plastics, batteries, heavy metals, toxic chemicals. And the states have the authority and the responsibility to regulate these as hazardous waste. And, you know, they have been given this responsibility by the EPA, because the EPA has said that these are not exempt from regulations related to NEPA and the recovery, the RCRA, the Resources Conservation Recovery Act, that says, look, you've got to deal with this kind of waste as a hazard. So the EPA has named it, you know, e-cigarettes as hazardous waste, and so they have to be dealt with. Schools now become generators, and communities also, because, you know, the schools, for instance, if they're picking these things up off the schoolyard or confiscating them from students, they then own that as hazardous waste, and they are responsible for the training and the transport and the storage and the disposal of all of this stuff as hazardous waste. So who's going to pay for that? And we haven't figured this part out yet, but this is another economic cost center, hazardous waste removal. So I recently, just today, heard about another one besides e-cigarettes, hookah. When you think about, well, you know, water pipes, hookah, that water, the stuff that filters the smoke going up into the, you know, the consumer, is full of toxins. What do hookah bars do with it? They dump it down the drain. So, you know, that is, again, another toxic hazardous waste product that is, you know, liquid in form, but yet is certainly another tobacco product waste concern. So that's another one to think about. Anyway, just to remind you about cigarette butts in the law, these are public nuisances. So there are some lawyers that are concerned about this, that want to think about, you know, maybe getting some clients, whether it's communities or NGOs or others, to deal with cigarette butts as a public nuisance that can be corrected through litigation. I'll just close by saying the cigarette acetate filter is a fraud. It has no health benefits. It's on almost all cigarettes. It doesn't biodegrade, and it causes cancer. Let me go back here. They have no health benefit, and I won't show you all the data on this, but the important thing to note is that when people inhale more deeply against a filter, the smoke gets deeper into the lungs. It creates a risk for another kind of lung cancer called adenocarcinoma, which is far more aggressive. And what we've seen is that adenocarcinoma incidence rates have gone up with the filter over the last 50 years, whereas every kind of other cancer has gone down. So there's enough said Surgeon General's reports and from the National Cancer Institute to say that these things are not healthy. They encourage people to start smoking and avoid quitting. And like flavorings, they make smoking more palatable. And we've actually found that on a variety of studies that we've been doing. So anyway, they can be gotten rid of. And there's a good case, I think, for banning the sale of filtered cigarettes. SB 424 last year went pretty far. It was pulled by the sponsors just recently. That would have banned the sale of filtered cigarettes as well as electronic nicotine delivery devices. And here in California would have set the state, you know, miles ahead of anybody else. And it still might be happening, especially with the encouragement of the Ocean Protection Council, which has asked for more information about filters just recently. So I'll conclude here saying that cigarette butts are toxic, mostly non-biodegradable waste. We need some new efforts that are especially economically impactful, that the industry and other parts of the provision chain have to be held responsible, and that we need to shove it back upstream, the responsibility from consumers and NGOs, and that should be best done at the local level. So we've got this economic model. There's a white paper on filters that we're going to do. There's a white paper on tobacco product waste that we just competed from the State Health Department. There's the trash amendment that we have to consider, and perhaps revision of the SB 424. So I want to thank you very much and say goodbye from the Surfers Against Sewage, who volunteered their bodies in the cold beaches to make their message clear.
That's great, Tom. Thank you very much for your presentation. This is like, to me, it feels like a fire hose of critical information that needs to inform us as scientists, as data analysts, as citizens of this state. So thank you very much, Tom, for that. I'd like to, I know that we have limited time for questions. I know you need to get going, but do you have time for a few questions?
Sure. Listen, I'm retired.
Okay. So I think one of the key things that you mentioned, you know, in triangulating the materials that you circulated before the fact and then the presentation, it does come down to costs, direct and indirect costs. Can you please, I guess for all of our sakes, because we're not really, some of us have limited exposure to these classifications, can you please provide more detail about how to distinguish direct costs from indirect costs?
Yeah.
And based on that, have you ever, do you have examples where indirect costs have been successfully litigated and associated with the impacts from these types of tobacco product waste?
Yeah, well, first, direct costs are costs that you actually pay money to have something done. Meaning, you know, in the case of butt cleanup, you're paying people who are out there raking up the butts and trash from the streets, for instance, or from the beaches. You know, for instance, even with voluntary butt cleanups, trash cleanups, I mean, there's a cost to that. I mean, you could say that, you know, somebody's time is worth, say, minimum wage to go out and do this. I mean, some people do pay. I mean, some communities do pay people to do exactly that. Some it's voluntary, but that's a direct cost. An indirect cost would be the loss of sort of value. For instance, if a community has, you know, depends on the beach for its livelihood as a tourist destination, and the beach is full of trash, beach is full of butts even, the indirect losses are something that they wouldn't be able to necessarily measure without, you know, much more sort of deep analysis. But the fact that people aren't visiting the beach, aren't spending any money, aren't, you know, enjoying a pristine beach like they would normally expect to do, those are indirect costs. So they're the sort of the result of it rather than necessarily the cost of cleaning it up. And in the case of, are there any examples of this? I think there are. I don't have them at my fingertips. What, you know, what we're going to be doing first in this economic study, as much as we can, several non-point source pollutants, and looking at what kind of economic studies and models, and they have been done, yes, and I know that they have been done. I don't have them at my fingertips, but I know that there has been these kinds of things. People have done indirect cost estimates for loss of pristine environments or something. You know, there's a way to monetize things. Here's the thing: economists are clever people. You know, these guys that just got the Nobel Prize at Stanford for auction theory. You know, I don't know what the hell that means, but the economists have ways of estimating costs based on estimates, based on estimates, based on estimates. And that, you know, eventually gives us an understanding of the value of something. And I think most of us can appreciate the value of a pristine environment. And that alone, I think, can be monetized. Like, what would you be willing to pay, for instance? That would be another way of approaching it, is the willingness to pay approach. Like, what would you be willing to pay to have absolutely no trash on your beach? So, I mean, those are economic concepts that are used oftentimes in all sorts of analyses. So I hope that helps answer the question. I'm pretty sure that those studies exist, but I don't have them on my fingertips.
Thank you very much.
I'll look though.
I imagine there are other questions as well.
Yeah, I have a question. Has there been any attempt by the public and/or the tobacco industry to provide a way for those using electronic waste to return it and at least make sure that it's collected in one spot rather than being thrown about the environment? Because we've certainly been finding a lot more of the electronic waste product in the areas that we've been doing research. But I was just curious, has there been any talk or any some of the smoke shops, have they, do they let people return those pods, for instance?
I think because they would then become generators of waste, of hazardous waste. They would then have to take it on. And personally, I'd like that to be part of the law, to say, if you sell the stuff, you have to take it back, which means that you would have to invest heavily in the management of this stuff and find ways that it would be disposed of appropriately. So that would add cost to these products, which would reduce their consumption and certainly reduce the interest in people in selling the shit. So yeah, the industry has started to put labels and descriptions in their products to say that these have to be disposed of, and you know, especially the lithium batteries. I mean, that one already, you know, we are not flying anymore, but you may remember announcements at the gate where you're flying is that when anybody wants to put their baggage into the hold, they have to take the electronic cigarettes out because of the lithium battery risk for explosion. So, you know, there's starting to be some kind of warnings, but it certainly isn't systematic. And it's, you know, I mentioned on the slide about the legal issues. One of the things that they could be held liable for is failing to warn. Failing to warn about the explosion risk, failing to warn about the toxicity to the environment, failing to warn about, you know, the need to dispose of these things as hazardous waste, because they are considered hazardous waste. They're defined, and the EPA is totally clear about it on more than one occasion. So yeah, not much yet. The industry knows it's happening. They're starting to put, you know, some descriptive stuff into the package, but there's no sort of direction as to what they do with it.
Do we have a final question?
I'll do one. Thanks for that, Thomas. That was really fantastic. I think I thought that cigarette butts were not plastic most of my life as well. It's quite a trick cigarette industry has managed to do in shifting the focus onto the littering rather than the production of the material, similar to what the beverage industry did in the 1950s and with Keep America Beautiful and all that sort of stuff. And so this is great, generating all this evidence to try to, like you say, push the responsibility back upstream. And what I'm curious is that the economic model that you folks are going to be generating, is there a mechanism to move that towards legislation? It is surprising that San Francisco is sort of a unique example on that front. I just looked up as you were talking what the cigarette industry spends on advertising is $9 billion. If you just take that number that you said for the 30 cities of $240 million for just those costs, well, it's decimal dust. It's 2.5% of just their advertising budget. Yeah. So it seems like it would be a viable thing to do to push to legislation.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I don't understand why other cities haven't taken San Francisco's model and tried to put it forward. Possibly because there's so much pushback from the tobacco industry. Anything that reeks of a tax or an economic thing that would reduce their sales, they mobilize, you know, all of the small shop owners and minority tobacco sellers, and they march them out. I went to testify, not on SB 424, but this was a few years ago, where the congressman from, or rather, assembly member from Monterey County put forward a bill to ban the sale of filtered cigarettes. And I showed up, and about, I don't know, 6 or 8 environmental groups, all of whom were women. And then opposing us were 43 small shop owners bust in from all over the state, all men, mostly minorities, and spoke vehemently about how any kind of ban on the sale of filtered cigarettes was going to drive them and their families into poverty, and that the state would die a slow economic death. So, you know, it is like, you know, a major, you know, they have deep pockets, and they have absolutely total energy to just, you know, bash any sort of effective stuff. And the principle that I think we should always remember is, if they like it, we should head in the opposite direction. And if they hate it, we're on the right track.
Great. Wynn, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That was really an amazing talk. You gave me a lot of ideas. I'm going to follow up with you afterward with some other questions, if that's all right. Sure. I have like a ton of questions. I wanted to give other people some time. Yeah, so our next thing coming up next month is going to be the all-call meeting, November 12th. Please be there. It's going to be a great party with lots of awesome people and lots of great discussion. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll have our next meeting as scheduled, and looking forward to seeing you all in about a month. Thanks for coming.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm glad you can make the time to be with us.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.